Afternoon all, let's have a look at the other encounter between Hort and Fischer in the Herceg Novi blitz of 1970. So remember, this is just a 5-minute game, and you'll get some horrendous looking blunders sometimes in 5-minute chess, as we all know. Okay, so d4 from Vlastimil Hort, and we see Fischer playing knight f6, and we see now knight f3 not committing a pawn with c4. Fischer plays g6, and then we see an early bishop g5 here. And in this position, there isn't the routine looking bishop g7. Instead, Fischer is keen to evict the bishop or force it to exchange on f6 immediately. You can imagine a move like bishop g7 might be answerable with queen d2. And here, okay, Fischer could still play h6, I guess, in this position, and then later castle kingside. But he chooses on this occasion to evict the bishop immediately with h6. Bishop goes to h4. If white takes, then okay, he doesn't really maybe want to give up this dark squared bishop yet. He wants to instead try and provoke g5 maybe, which would weaken some of black's light squares. Bishop g7, and after knight bd2, Fischer indeed does play g5. After bishop g3, okay, if white castles kingside, sorry, if black castles kingside, then there's going to be h4, which could be painful. And you know, white could potentially get onto these light square weaknesses around the king. So Fischer perhaps is not so keen now to castle routinely. Instead, he plays knight h5 in this position. Okay, he's going to grab that dark square bishop, it seems. White plays e4, and then we see d6. And in this position, g4 has become maybe a serious threat. White should try and reinforce the centre with c3 perhaps. Instead, he loses a pawn for not much compensation after bishop d3. So g4, and black is winning now that centre pawn. So what compensation is there, though, white has? So c3, okay, gains a tempo on the bishop, and now knight f5, and it looks as though, well, some light squares have opened up. Maybe e4 can be made use of if black plays bishop takes f5. But black is not keen to play bishop f5 here. He takes on g3, offering white the opportunity for the seemingly dynamic looking hg. But is it that dynamic? Perhaps it is one of the better moves in the position, actually. Because if hg, maybe there's some interesting tactics in this position against the g4 pawn. For example, h5, is there potentially queen takes g4? For example, like this. No, the bishop's protecting the rook. Forget that. So, if h5 is playable, this is it still looks preferable to the game continuation. In this position, at least, white potentially can play f3 undermining later, or f4 if black gets a piece on the e5. We see in the game continuation white playing the more controversial recapture by playing f takes g3. White may be looking at the f file and thinking that's quite attractive. The problem is the e5 square, and also the diagonal is going to be weaker than usual. So we see e6 evicting the knight, and now h5 protecting the pawn. After castles, we see knight d7, and that e5 square is looking fairly ominous. If white can't play d4 and f4, how will a piece be evicted away from the use of that e5 square? Queen e2, queen e7, as though Fischer wants to castle queenside. After rook a e1, he first plonks the knight on e5. After knight dc4, he's keen to maintain a piece on e5 and not capture any of these. He plays just bishop d7. We see now a slight trap set after knight a5. If Fischer routinely castles here, there's going to be a bit of trouble. Starting with bishop a6, it's quite troublesome. What does black do about b7? If he takes, he gets mated. That's not very nice. If he tries to protect the pawn, then actually there's a forcing move here, knight takes c6 attacking the queen, and another forcing move, bishop takes b7 available, which would leave white with serious advantage and pressure. Okay, that would really justify white's play here. Instead, Fischer is cautious. He plays b6, evicting that knight. It goes back to c4, and now, okay, he now castles. White takes on e5, retakes, now check. It's not as harmful as before this position at all. Knight c4, and the bishop retreats back to g7 here. Fischer is looking forward to peeling open some lines with h4, just getting at the white king. a4, white is also trying to open up some lines. So we have a very exciting position in contrast with their previous Slav defense exchange variation encounter. But okay, to do the line opening in an accelerated fashion, do we need to hold on to that g4 pawn? No. Fischer just sacks the g4 pawn to accelerate his attack. He plays h4. Access paths to the king, that's the key thing. Open up the roads to the king. That would be another open road as well if that's taken. Instead, white tries to ignore it. He tries to open up his own roads with a5. Fischer opens up that h-file pressure now, and now closes down the a-file a little bit with the next move, b5. So he doesn't want white to open up that a-file against his king. Could be quite dangerous. The knight goes back, and now c6. And it looks as though the bishop's a little bit in trouble potentially as well. White plays now c4, which is a bit anti-positional again, because now that d4 can be used even more effectively. Okay. b4, keeping the lines closed, and after c5 offering a pawn, black plays now bishop d4, pinning that knight. And it also means you can imagine quick moves like f5 and queen h7 just to go for a hack attack become very dangerous here as well. White takes on d6, and after queen takes d6 there's serious battery threats like queen c5 as well on the cards here, and queen h5. It looks very, very bad, and queen g3 of course is immediately threatened, and that's the main one white has to address. With rook f4 he protects g3. We see now a classic doubling of rooks now, rook h5. Really unpleasant position now for white. White plays rook d1, huge blunder of course. Black plays the forcing move, bishop takes e3, just winning material. So queen takes e3, queen takes d1, it's all over. Queen d6, white could have resigned here, but now after c5, faced with things like queen takes a6 and queen d4, to exchange off queens, white does resign here. A very exciting game, and one where white was slaughtered of course, but it shows from Fischer, even in 5-minute chess, a good alertness for tactical opportunity, not becoming lapse in concentration after winning a pawn, centre pawn, being cautious with his king, not just routinely castling king side, but preparing to castle queen side. White shows some enthusiasm for dynamic play with f takes g3, but not so much central square control in this game. And it's the central square control which really counts here for black having a very, very comfortable position. But nevertheless, in this position, white's use of knight a5, bit of a trap is set, and Fischer avoids the trap by playing not routinely castling queenside but evicting the knight, and now castling queenside. So he hasn't got any really serious issues around his king now. Both sides going to try and open up lines against each other as fast as possible, even sacrificing pawns in the process. But black's attack ultimately is stronger here because the central control has implications for white's king safety here. That use of the d4 square, very, very nasty pin coming up. And you know, the fractured pawns here don't really help white as well. Having to defend g3 with rook f4 means that actually black's rooks coordinate much better than white's rooks in this position. So threatening to double up rooks and do all sorts of nasty things actually. and even rook a5 if needed. But before that, no, a huge blunder now with rook d1, accelerates to the end of the game. Heavy loss of material. Okay, so white resigned here, much more exciting than the other encounter. I hope you'll agree. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.